Hello, folks. J. Scott Phillips here, and tonight we are bound once again for the golden age of science fiction with a look at Robert Heinlein's third published short story, Requiem, which first appeared in the January 1940 issue of Astounding Science-Fiction. And not only that, but it's also Rocket Summer now, well into Rocket Summer, which is a now annual BookTube event created a couple of years ago now by Michael K. Vaughan. And he and his company of co-hosts are encouraging the rest of us on BookTube here to all be reading and enjoying vintage science fiction through the month of July. And I'll leave a link to Mike's announcement video for Rocket Summer 2025 down below, as well as links to all of his co-host channels. So if you're a science fiction fan, be sure and check them out too. Mike has recommended that to kind of get a nice cross-section of vintage science fiction, which he is defining as any science fiction written before 1970. So to get that nice kind of overview would be to start off in week 1 of July by reading any science fiction or what might have been considered science fiction retroactively, if you look back to the dawn of man writing any kind of literature at all the way up through the 1930s. Then week 2 would be the 1940s, week 3, the 50s, and week 4, you guessed it, the 1960s. So I wanted to start in on this week 1, but I've fallen a little behind here, not unusual for me and my videos here. I wanted to start off with doing a Robert Heinlein story, the next in a series of his that I've done. I've done 2 before already. One was his first short story that was ever published, which was Lifeline, and then I did Misfit, his second story, a while ago. And so I wanted for Rocket Summer to do the third story of his, Requiem. But it's week 2 now, so we're into the 1940s. But I think I'm still okay because even though it first appeared in the January 1940 issue of Astounding Science-Fiction, it was written in 1939, and even that issue, which was cover dated January 1940, actually hit the newsstands, was published just before Christmas 1939. So I'm going to kind of ride that edge there between those two. So this first offering of mine for Rocket Summer will be the 1930s and the 1940s, just right on that transition there between the two. So like I said, I've done videos for his first 2 stories, Misfit, Lifeline first, and then Misfit secondly. I'll leave links to those down below if you're interested in that. But what I like to do on my channel is talk a little bit about, if I can ever do the research to find out, where did the story come from? What was the background of getting it published? Then we'll chat about the story and then follow that up with any artwork or illustration that was done for the story. And so I'd like to start off here with chatting a little bit about what Robert Heinlein was up to after his second story was published, when Misfit came out, and then bring us up to date for Requiem. Then we'll chat about the story and get into the artwork, and then I'll let you go about your business. So Heinlein was still a very new writer at this time, and he was just getting his momentum going with selling a couple of stories now already to John W. Campbell Jr. at Astounding Science-Fiction. His first story, Lifeline, appeared in the August 1939 issue of Astounding, and his second pretty quickly afterwards in the November 39 issue, and that was Misfit. Now, in the meantime, he was working on a third story that he called Vine and Fig Tree. Sent that off to Campbell as well, and Campbell really liked the story and bought it. And but he responded to Heinlein saying that he was going to go in and change a few things in this, rewrite some portions of it himself, because he felt that certain religious themes that Heinlein had worked into the story would not set well with his readers of Astounding Science-Fiction. So he was going to work on that, but here's a nice big fat check for it. And Heinlein appreciated the check, but it bothered him that someone else was going to go in and tinker with this story here. Heinlein had, before he got this momentum going with Campbell, he had already written a full novel before he had ever gotten anything published, and it was called For Us the Living. Heinlein never managed to get that novel sold. It was just getting rejected all around. And it was really nothing more than, little more, I guess I should say, than Heinlein's own ideologies looking into the future. What happens if certain political trends, technological trends are followed by humanity into the future, and what will that lead us through? But like I say, it wasn't selling. It never sold in his lifetime. But now that he was getting some momentum going, he had been going back to that manuscript and pulling ideas out of it and writing short stories that were selling now to Campbell. So his third story here, Vine and Fig Tree, he was once again going back to For Us the Living and pulling ideas out of that to craft a short story out of that. And it was working. Campbell liked it, but now he was going to change it. Heinlein's vision was that he was going to craft a future history of his stories, so that eventually, as these stories, they might be decades or centuries apart, marching through humanity's future. But at some point, they all form a cohesive chronology, and they will interlock with each other and have a consistent thread running throughout. Campbell now doesn't know what Campbell is going to do to his story, but he doesn't want someone messing with that. But he's very thankful for the paycheck he's getting. He's getting some, like I say, some momentum selling these stories to Campbell, and he's feeling like, with these kinds of checks coming in, with this kind of regularity, he'd be able to pay down his mortgage very quickly and then get on with life. But in the meantime, he thought, okay, I'll accept the terms here. He wrote a letter back to Campbell telling him this. And then he said, and also, here is another manuscript I've written called Requiem. And so he included that in the letter. Campbell got that and read the manuscript for Requiem and liked it immediately and bought it right away. And so he wrote back to Heinlein, here's a nice big fat check again for Requiem. And so his fourth story that he wrote actually got published before the Vine and Fig Tree story, because Campbell was going to apparently take some time reworking it, however that is going to turn out. That story eventually came out later on as If This Goes On. But in the meantime, Requiem came out. And when it first appeared in the January 1940 issue of Astounding Science-Fiction, Heinlein got it and opened up and was reading his story and was infuriated when he found out that Campbell had added a few lines to the very end of his story. And this just really upset Heinlein. He didn't say anything at the time to Campbell because he was still trying to sell stories to him and pay his house down. But a year later, he felt like he and Campbell had gotten to know each other better, and Heinlein was more comfortable in chatting about these kinds of things to Campbell, and told him, he was quoted as telling Campbell, "You damn near ruined Requiem by adding 4 lines in the end." So in other words, Requiem damn near killed him. And Heinlein was starting to figure out at this point, just like Isaac Asimov, at this very same time, they were both figuring out that Campbell was rejecting or changing stories not based on what he felt his readers would like, but what Campbell himself liked, with his own biases and political agendas dictated to him. So Heinlein, as well as Asimov, but Heinlein was starting to realize that I have to write for Campbell, not for the readers. And so this was starting to kind of chew on him. But that's another story. Let's get into Requiem here. That's why we're all here tonight anyway. Now, did I say a minute ago that Campbell immediately liked Requiem and bought it? Well, I misspoke a little bit. Campbell did buy it immediately. He did tell Heinlein that he didn't particularly care for the story himself because it was overly sentimental. And he bought it anyway because he felt that his readers, he wanted to experiment a little bit with the readers to see if the readers liked this sentimental approach. And that kind of flies in the face of what Heinlein was starting to think as far as Campbell making his decisions based on what he liked and not what his readers liked. But if this little part of the story is true, then Campbell was at least trying some things, testing some things with the readers rather than basing things completely on his own judgment if he truly didn't like Requiem that much or care for sentimental tales. And so Requiem is a very sentimental and a very heartfelt story. It's, I guess I should say, a story about Dallas D. Harriman, who at the beginning of the story is a very old and a very rich man. It's about 1998 in Heinlein's future. And Harriman himself had been born around the turn of the 20th century. And so within his lifetime, he had been around for the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk and grew up reading the planetary romances, the early science fiction pulp magazines. And he believed in a future where spaceflight could be possible. So as a young man, he starts to invest in getting himself into the industries and just the cultural aspects of helping to make these kinds of futures become possible. Someday, humanity will be able to get out into space and get to the moon and to Mars and maybe beyond. He dreams of the day before he dies of setting foot on the moon himself. He's going to get to the moon, literally, if it's the last thing he does. And so he wants to go to certain colleges and study under certain professors that are leaders in science, astronomy, other technologies, societal, cultural trends and things like that, engineering. That's what he wants to do. And Heinlein would often work in autobiographical material in these kinds of stories. He did it with one particular character in Misfit, which I did another video about. But in this particular story, he has a scene, for instance, that takes place in Butler, Missouri, which was Heinlein's own hometown. That's where he grew up. So when he's talking about places in and around Butler, he's speaking from his own memories and things. So you can kind of expect that those places did exist. And then he has a lot of references to places and things in and around the Kansas City area, which he was also familiar with. And those professors and universities is he talking about. Those were all actual real people and places. He names names. And I don't know if you're like me, a lot of people aren't, but when I come across a little reference like the professor's name in this particular story, I'll go down a rabbit hole and I'll look it up. It doesn't matter to the story itself. They might be fictional. But when I find out that in Heinlein's case, he was using actual people and places, I enjoy that because now it grounds certain aspects of the story in a reality that now is shared by all the fantastic things that happen in the story. So it's either easier or more fun to read about the fantastic things to believe that it's all true, because these things are true. We know these to be true if you go down that rabbit hole. So these things must also be true. So we get to share in that. It's just, for me, it makes the reading a little more fun to ground it in that kind of level of reality. Anyway, getting back to the story here. So Harriman now, he is spending his life gathering wealth and influence in the industry. And by 1998, he is well known, a public figure, in being one of the magnates of the space industry and wants to now go to the moon, his final dream. But the government's involved now. And does this sound kind of familiar? As rich as possible his dream is now that he helped to facilitate himself, the government, the UN in particular in this story, is regulating the space industry and saying what you can and can't do, whether you want to take the risk or not. Now, granted, Harriman is a very old man, so all the doctors say that he probably would not survive the flight, but he wants to risk it, although government says, no, whether you want to risk it or not, whether you got all the money in the world or not, we're not going to let you do this. So he starts to take matters into his own hands, and he hires a couple of rocket men who have somewhat of a checkered past, but they know their stuff. they can get him to the moon, and for a price, they will help him do this. So they become friends over the course of the story, and that's kind of part of the sentimentality of the tale. But Harriman buys an old rocket ship. It's a fixer-upper, and these two guys, the captain and the engineer, are working on the ship somewhere in Arizona and getting it space-worthy. And they're going to get Harriman to the moon. And then it might also help them get back into being registered to fly themselves. They're kind of on the no-fly list themselves for certain nefarious reasons. But anyway, the government finds out they're working on this ship and come to shut the operation down. Someone gets killed as a result. They're going to do whatever they need to do to get Harriman to the moon. So there's some of that aspect going on. But anyway, I guess at this point I should issue a spoiler alert if you don't know the ending of the story already. A pretty well-known Heinlein story, and even the title foreshadows the end of the story. It opens with, well, we'll get into that in a minute here. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read it and you don't want to know what's going on, we're going to talk about the illustration, which itself appears in the opening spread of the story in Astounding, kind of giving the ending away. But if you don't want to know, we'll give you a little countdown here so you can go and pause the video, read the story, and then come back and join the rest of us who have either read it already or don't care about spoilers. Now, if you haven't read it yet, you can probably most easily find it in a collection of Heinlein stories called The Man Who Sold the Moon. And that story itself, The Man Who Sold the Moon, is kind of a broader story of Harriman. This story, Requiem, is just about the last days of his life. Anyway, if not that book, you might be able to find it in Heinlein's The Pass Through Tomorrow, which is a collection of a lot of his future history stories. All right, with all that having been said now, we'll give you a few seconds here to go and read it, come back, pause the video, come back and join the rest of us, and we'll move on. And we're all back again. So the story of Requiem takes its name and inspiration from Robert Louis Stevenson's epitaph. He's buried in Samoa, and his own poem appears on his grave marker, and I'll just read it to you here. Now, again, I'm no particular professional narrator myself, so help me out here. And while I'm reading this, maybe you can imagine this verse being read by Paul Frees. All right, so here we go. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from sea, and the hunter, home from the hill. And then the reader of Heinlein's Requiem is told that this verse appears also in another place, stuck into the ground by a knife. And so now we can take a look at the illustration for Requiem in Astounding Science-Fiction, January 1940, illustrated by M. Isip. And this is the very final scene of the story. And we know now that this is the other place that Heinlein is saying that Stevenson's epitaph appears. Here we see McIntyre, the captain of the moon rocket, and Charlie, the engineer. They have just carried Harriman out from the ship onto the surface of the moon and propped him up against a rock. He did not do well in the flight to the moon and is dying now, but he's still alive and conscious. And so they prop him up on this rock where he can see the Earth and the moonscape out before him. And he's awaiting his last breath with that spectacular view, just as he has always wanted to do before he died. And then in the background, you can get a glimpse of the rocket ship, never really described in the story, so M. Isip here gives us an interesting interpretation of it. But during the flight, they realized that they need to name the ship, and they named it the Lunatic. Now, if you're interested any more in the artist M. Isip here, I did talk a little more about his background and show some other examples of some of his artwork in another video I did on Two Sought Adventure, which was Fritz Leiber's first Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser story. I'll leave a link below if you care to check that out. But if you're wondering about those lines at the end of the story that Campbell added that Heinlein was so upset about, I'll just read them real quick here. It's just 4 lines of copy. But Heinlein wanted the story to end on a more subtle or elegant note, or maybe a more poetic note maybe, and let the reader take it from there. It's not a stretch for the reader to figure this out here, but Campbell just came in, Heinlein felt, with a sledgehammer and was just hitting his readers over the head with, do you get it? Do you get it? Here, let me show this to you. Here, do you get it? And so I'll just read the lines here real quick. Campbell added, Charlie looked toward the relaxed figure propped up on the bed of lunar pumice, face fixed toward the earth. Well, he grunted, he hit the moon. And that is how the story ended in Astounding. Heinlein made absolutely sure that those lines were stricken from any time the story was reprinted anywhere else. So unless you have that old original Astounding, you won't read that. But I think you can see why Heinlein didn't really care for that kind of thing. So there you have it, folks. I'll just like to thank Michael K. Vaughan once again and his company of co-hosts for bringing us Rocket Summer again. Always a fun event. And then just to generate some comments, let me know down below if you yourself are a Heinlein fan, if you've got a favorite Heinlein story. Have you read Requiem? What did you think of it? Things like that. Anything relating to Heinlein or maybe another 1930s or 40s vintage science fiction that you like. Any favorite illustrators from those days that you care to chat about. Anything like that. It's always nice to get a little conversation going here. So with all that, then, I will let you go for now. And until the next chance we get to explore the golden age of science fiction or anything else that we might care to discuss, thanks a lot.